بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا بفضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. Okay, so he says الكلام في استصحاب الحال. Right, so this is a kind of did we do this? I don't think we did it. I don't remember doing it, but it's kind of a non-dalil, right? It's more like it's like yeah, like imagine, for example, in mathematics, right? Imagine if you said that one is actually one. You know, is that a dalil in mathematics? Like that one cannot be more than one. It's more like the concept of unit. Like if I say two, that means two ones, right? And if one can be more than one, you get confused, you know? So it's more like the functioning of things, right? So istishab al-hal is the idea that things stay as they are, right? So the default is X, right? So keeping situations as they are. So you don't have wudu, but you may have made wudu. Okay, well then I'm going to assume you don't have wudu, right? Somebody's alive and they might be dead. Well, I'm going to assume they're alive, right? Something happened at one time and something happened in the past. It could have happened at time at t equals 1 or t equals 2 1 or t equals 2. Well, if I'm doubting t equals 1 and by t equals 2, then it definitely happened. That I'm going to say it happened. So that's a dalil, right? Like there's a qaida fiqhiyya, right? For example, for the Shafi'is, we'll say تنسب الأحداث إلى was it إلى آخر وقت ممكن, right? Right, we apply things, anything that happens, we apply it to the last possible time. That's all istishab al-hal. We call it al-yaqeen la yazulu bil-shak. We call it istishab al-hal. We call it whatever it is. Bara'at al-dhimma, right? The default is you're guilty, you're innocent until proven guilty, right? That's istishab al-hal because the default is you weren't guilty, etc. Right? So that's it's a concept that we all use in different ways, right? We all use it in different ways. Right? So he says قال المصنف رحمه الله تعالى ونفعنا الله بعلمه وعلمكم آمين. He says ليس عن مالك رحمه الله في ذلك النص ولكن مذهبه يدل عليه لأنه يحتج في أشياء كثيرة سئل عنها فقال لم يفعل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ذلك ولا الصحابة رحمه الله عليهم. Right, so the asl is then that's wrong or something like that. وكذلك يقول ما رأيت أحدا فعله. وهذا يدل على أن السمع إذا لم يرد بإيجاب شيء لم يجب وكان على ما كان عليه من براءة الذمة. The default is this, the default is that. There's no proof for something to be haram, then default is halal, etc. والأصل في ذلك أن الله عز وجل قد احتج على عباده في العبادات بالعقل والسمع فما كان له حكم في العقل ولم يرد سمع بخلافه فأمره موقوف على ورود السمع فإن ورد بمثل ما كان في العقل كان مؤكدا وإن ورد بخلافه فقد نقل الأمر عما كان عليه. So the thing has changed. وإن لم يرد سمع بشيء من ذلك فهو على أصل حكمه في العقل والله أعلم. So here, when he says, it sounds like he's going off into some other tangent here, right? So we have to understand that basically, whenever you don't get involved into something, like whenever you don't get involved in a discipline, you will often have an opinion in that discipline unintentionally. Okay, so you can imagine our author. That our author is pretty early. He's talking to some Mu'tazila, but not really. He's not really Mu'tazili. The Mu'tazili Sunni debates are not really refined, and so you can accidentally end up saying something that could be funny. So if you read this, you could quote him to have said that if the aql says that something is halal and there's no sama', there's no revelation to say otherwise, then it's going to be halal. And if the aql says that it is haram and there's no revelation to say otherwise, then it is haram. Does that make sense? So there's one thing is istishab al-hal as a concept. The other one is what's called when you say the default on something, is it halal or haram? The way he's phrasing it, it sounds like the aql is an asl. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So it
Yes.
says, so it says, وَإِن لَمْ يَرِدْ سَمْعٌ بِشَيْءٍ مِنْ ذَلِكَ فَهُوَ عَلَى أَصْلِ حُكْمِهِ فِي الْعَقْلِ. So this is what the Mu'tazila say, right? So we as Ahl Sunnah, we don't say that, right? We don't say that the aql can make something good or bad, right? So we have a debate between ourselves. What if there was no dalil aslan for something to be halal haram, right? So we do istishab al-hal and we assume the default. So the question is, what is the default? Right? Is the default that something is halal, it's haram? I believe we had that discussion before. But the language he's using, and maybe he's not trying to say that, but what he's saying is that you could use him to quote this thing to say that basically he's saying that the aql defines halal and haram. If there was no dalil, right? So then accordingly, if we asked him and said, Habibi, then if I was on Mars, right, and no revelation came to me, are you trying to say that it would be haram for me to murder somebody? Because the aql says it's bad? Because that's what the Mu'tazila would say, right? The Mu'tazila would say your mind can tell you that, right? And we say the mind can't tell you that, right? So anyway, the point he's trying to say is that you keeping things as they are. Is that a valid approach or not a valid approach? And he's saying, yes, it is, right? However, the language he's using, the way he's phrasing it is just a bit loose. So you have to understand that that's what people will do, right? If you went and ask Ibn Umar, for example, about al-Hasan, al-Hadith al-Hasan li ghayrihi, do you think he's going to have an opinion that reflects like how we define things properly or how we should look at hadith? No. He might say something that would be like, you might find a Sahabi saying something like, I don't know, like, oh yeah, I don't trust certain Sahaba, I don't trust this person. So it's because it's not very refined, right? If I asked you a question about something, like if I asked you a question about psychology right now, you probably adopt like maybe the position of Freud or position of Jung or the position of somebody just because you don't even know about it. You know what I'm saying? So you find certain early scholars saying certain things that like, oh, that's kind of technically wrong. That's just because they're not the science is not really refined, or they're just using kind of loose language. Does that make sense? Whereas a later
Yes.
text would never do that because, like, well, if you said this, you mean this, right? Is everyone's following me?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so Allah alam. So anyway, the point is that we mentioned here. Al-qawl fil ijma' ba'd al-khilaf. Aha, right? So we spoke about this before when we spoke about ijma' and we spoke about Ibn Hazm and all of these things, right? So Ibn Hazm's point is there's no ijma' after khilaf. Khalas. Right? Doesn't exist. So the Sahaba agreed upon something. Qawlan or fi'lan. They all said, they all did. If they didn't, khalas, mukhtalif fi. End of story. That's it. Right? So al-ijma' ba'd al-khilaf means nothing. Right? But this is fundamentally different to the way that we, traditional scholars or people who look at the form of madhahib, do things. Right? So if you look at, practically speaking, the four madhahib clarified masail, described masail, and practically speaking, basically made the deen as a form of madhahib. Now, is that technically 100% true? No, it's not. But practically, it's like that. Right? And so if you look at the whole issue with Ibn Taymiyyah and maybe Hanbalis, you can comment on this more than I can. That's exactly the whole issue, right? Al-ijma' ba'd al-khilaf, basically. I mean, not until about mas'ala, no masail aqdiyah, but I'm talking about the masail fiqhiyah. That's what it is. It's like we've already agreed on this, but can we have ijma' after khilaf, and is it really ijma' or not, right? So one approach is the deen that it's like a system. If you take the Ibn Hazm approach, the deen remains open-ended forever. Like whatever the Sahaba did not agree on, khalas, it's open, totally open, right? Whereas if we take the approach of majority of scholars and just like the way it worked is that you have this continually a continually self-editing process, which makes the deen more refined and more strict. Does that make sense? Like more strict meaning these are the opinions. You follow me? So like, there's two riwayas from Imam Ahmad, and now there's one. There's three narrations from Imam Malik on this issue, and now there's one. So then the deen effectively becomes four very specific opinions. That's it. As opposed to 30, you know? And so it's quite an interesting concept. So this is if you read the Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali in his Rad ala man lam what is it man lam يتبع المذاهب الأربع ولا لم يمتزل المذاهب الأربع, that's what he's talking about, is this idea that just like we did with the qira'at, we narrowed out things that were fringe. We did the same things with the fatawa that were fringe. The Salaf did that, and that created the four madhahib, and khalas, that's it. But if you don't do that, then things are kind of just very open. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So it says
Yes.
إذا اختلف الصحابة رضي الله عنهم على قولين وانقرضوا على ذلك ثم أجمع تابعون على أحد القولين, right? Or اجتمعوا, there's ijma' on, for example, three positions, right? And then tabi'in agree on two, right? Or 10 positions, and then the tabi'in agree on 5, etc., right? فهل يسقط الخلاف أم هو باق ليس عن مالك رحمه الله في ذلك نص واختلف. So when you say there's no nas, that's a bit funny, given that Imam Malik sees the amal of Ahl Medina as the arbiter, as the hakam between everything. So he's like, yes, I acknowledge that the Sahaba disagreed, but the truth is found in Medina, and Medina preserves what is right. So what has become the fatwa of the Sahaba and Tabi'een and the Tabi'een in Medina, that is the deen. So it's kind of a bit odd that you say he doesn't have a nas on it, given that he's actually ultra conservative. Like he's ultra non-pluralistic, right? So he's like, yeah, I don't care what the amal of Kufa is, or the amal, he wouldn't be interested in any of those things. So anyway, it's a bit interesting how he's kind of phrased it. It says ليس عن مالك رحمه الله في ذلك نص واختلف أصحابه في ذلك فقال بعضهم ينقطع الخلاف ولا يجوز مخالفة إجماع التابعين بعدهم وقال بعضهم بل الخلاف باق لا ينقطع. قال القاضي رحمه الله الجيد وهو الذي اختاره شيخنا أبو بكر بن صالح الأبهري أن الخلاف باق، وذلك أن تقدير المسألة أن يكون قول الصحابي المخالف بمنزلة حضوره مع التابعين، وكونه حيا معهم، وكونه ميتا لا يسقط خلافه لهم بإجماعهم على خلافه، وأحسن أحوال التابعين معه أن يكونوا بمنزلة الصحابة معه في أن مخالفة الصحابة له من طريق الاجتهاد لا يسقط خلافه، وكذلك قول التابعين وإجماعهم على خلافه من طريق الاجتهاد لا يسقط خلافه لهم، ولأن قوله بمنزلة أن لو كان حيا معهم ويصير إجماعهم كطائفة انضافت إلى أحد الخبرين من الصحابة رضي الله عنه وبالله التوفيق. Right, so that's his argument there. So he seems like he's going to that position. Wallahu alam. And then the same condition continues after that. But that's not practically what happened. Practically, the way things are viewed is slightly different, right? And so you see, Allahu alam, as far as I understand, the clearest voice against what happened and against the concretifying, if that's a word, right, of the former madhahib and the former madhahib becoming the deen of Allah is the Hanbalis, as far as I understand, right? So the existence of Ibn Taymiyyah and his opinions. And I asked some shuyukh about this. I said, what does Ibn Taymiyyah mean? Like, forget Ibn Taymiyyah, but just Ibn Taymiyyah, what does he represent as a phenomenon in the civilization of Islam, right? And they were like, yeah, that's a good question to ask. What does it mean? But it seems to be something like that, right? It's like, just as the deen and the ummah self-checked themselves and self-edited themselves, the existence of someone like Ibn Taymiyyah was almost checking the checking. Like, we're checking ourselves too much. we've agreed on certain things a little bit too much, and there's other positions that actually are possibly correct, and now suddenly they've been labeled as wrong, right? And so I don't know again what happened after Ibn Taymiyyah and all the things, but certainly, and I don't know exactly the role or the views of Al-Mara al-Karmi and others, but it seems to be that voice, right, that exists in the Hanbali school that no, the form of madhahib are not binding, and there are other positions outside of the form of madhahib, and as long as the position is clear, you can follow that, right? Wallahu alam, which is very dangerous, you know, and I'd be extremely hesitant. So it's nice to see it, like I don't, it's nice to see that, it's refreshing to see that, but I'd be extremely hesitant of stepping out of the form of madhahib for many reasons, right? It's a very, very dangerous thing to do. Wallahu alam. Does that make sense?
Yes, makes sense.
Right.
Can I ask a question
Go ahead, Bismillah.
regarding this?
Bismillah, yeah.
So, for example, when we talk about music, right? Music is like a thing, like the mu'tamad of every madhab regards as haram.
Mm-hmm.
So, how to deal with a person who says it's halal?
Yeah. So I think basically one of the problems is that I think when you go into any of the madhahib, I don't think it's as clear as that. I just don't think it's as clear as that. So what would be better is if you found a mas'ala that is very, very clear in the school. Like the Hanbalis as a collectivity have all agreed on this. You know, the Shafi'is as a collectivity, they have all agreed on this. Khalas. And then you come up with something crazy. Like, for example, um, starting the fast at sunrise. You know, like that's a fatwa of some of the tabi'een. That's like crazy, right? The issue with music, I just don't think it's as clear as that. You know, so I don't think it's not one of those masail that's very clear. Allahu alam. So so yes, it is the form of dhahib. That is like you go and ask a Maliki in the Maliki school, what is a relied upon position? That is it. It is the relied upon position. But is the relied upon position, you know, the only position? I don't think so at all. So, you know, as far as I know, with many Malikis, is that, you know, they did historically allow music for certain reasons. You know, so Ibn Battuta, right? Ibn Battuta is traveling the world. Everyone's playing music. You know, everyone's playing music, and I mean, he's not the Sheikh al-Islam, right? But everyone's playing music, and he doesn't say anything about it. When he does object to certain things, you know, he doesn't. I don't think he makes any comment whatsoever. He's in where is it? Like somewhere in Central Asia, like I'm trying to think now, Uzbekistan, and the ruler is drinking nabidh, you know, and he's like, oh, it's okay, the Hanafis, you know, so they're drinking
Mm.
honey alcohol. He's like, oh yeah. So today we were like, oh, but haven't the Hanafis now agreed that that's haram? He's like, well, so he didn't see that as agreed upon by among the Hanafis. He's like, khalas, this is, you know, this is an ikhtilaf, and that's it. But he does object to certain things. He says, you know, for example, the slaves of this country, they walk around naked. That's not good. These people, they hang out with females. That's not good. He does object to certain things, right? So Allahu Alam. So the issue with music, you know, there are nusus here and there, and I had always been of the opinion that it's kind of agreed upon that it's haram, but I don't think that's actually true. And who is it? Hatim al-Auni, right? Sheikh Hatim al-Auni. He's, you know, he was kind of he makes the point as well. It's like it's not very accurate, you know, to say that we all agree that it's haram. Wallahu a'lam. But again, it's one of these things that's a really, really bad fatwa, because it's one like two people I've spoken to about who are musicians, right? Anybody in the music field, music and zina are like hand in hand, 100%. Like you know, as a married man, it's like Spawn is very different. It's like I'm always thinking like what music is not to do with sex. You know what I'm saying? Like it's almost like everything is that. It's like music, alcohol, and sex is like one thing. So like it's like one system, you know? And so it's like shocking what you know, like as a kid, like, oh, I think back some lyrics that I heard as a kid, and like, oh my God, like that's like really bad. And it's not even, you know, and that's not new. It's not new. It's always been there, right? So like music, dancing, all these things is like one system. So I think it's a very, very, very dangerous fatwa and it's very, very harmful. But when it comes to an ilmi point to say, like, come along and say the former madhab agree, like you could say that, is the mu'tamad the madhab? Is it really the same thing? I don't think that's 100% true. Wallahu alam. Does that make sense, Abdul Jalil?
Yes, makes sense.
Yeah. Go ahead, Arias.
I want to ask, do you think like the modern Salafi approach comes from the Ibn Taymiyyah or Ibn Hazm approach with especially this kind of method of saying things like uh, there are multiple opinions, but this is the truth. The Malikis are wrong with the Sadl and so on. Like, would you
I
say
don't know.
that?
I don't know about that, so I don't know enough. As far as I know, though, one that basically, and many of you know better than me. Okay, like honestly, I'm kind of like somebody who lives in my own bubble. But what I understand is the early Salafis. Okay, the early Salafis were one of the things they were rejecting was not pluralism. One of the things they were rejecting is that the former madhahib are too strict, and that you have these systems that are way too complex and way too strict, and they cannot possibly change and they cannot possibly adapt fast enough for the modern world. So we need to do ijtihad, meaning not that we're going to invalidate the former madhahib, but just the former madhahib agree on certain things that are very, very, very dhanni, and there's no real need to adopt to stick to them, you know? And so I think that's one aspect of it. The aspect of there's only one truth, that's another aspect of Ibn Hazm, and that's something just really weird, right? So Ibn Hazm, just like some of the things he says, is kind of like it's just silly, it's like you're just not very intelligent on that issue, it's like kind of silly. So I don't know about like not like lack of not having pluralism and taking one opinion over something else. It just seems a little bit silly. So the way he speaks is kind of like somebody who doesn't understand how his own mind is working, if that makes sense. Right. And you find people like that. I've seen that many times. The people are not bad, but they're just not very intelligent. Right. I mean, who would be like imagine for example if you were originally from like Bosnia or something like that, and then you became Hanbali, like you have a problem, right? Joke. Uh, no, but I'm
Yeah.
saying,
I actually know,
yeah, you know somebody like that? Oh, subhanAllah, they exist?
yeah, I know Bosnian Hanbali.
Alhamdulillah. The joke I have with my son now is we say Ameen, which means yeah, we're making dua for that brother. He's got problems. We just look at each other and say Ameen. And I'm joking. But I'm trying to say is there are certain people who are really good, like, but they don't have a certain aspect of their brain on that particular issue. They can't actually crack those kind of concepts. So they say things that don't make any sense. And they don't mean to not make any sense, but they just, you know. And honestly, like I can remember listening to Sheikh Albani, rahimahullah, he's talking about something and just subhanAllah, I was like, wow, he saw that. Right. So there's one thing is to say, oh, he's bad or he's proud or he's this. And it's just actually you just don't have the ability to understand something. And I honestly believe a lot of Salafis like that. Actually,
Yeah,
just
makes
like,
sense.
wallahu alam. And other people, other people just like whatever it is. So again, there's two issues there. And one is there's only one answer. Let's try and find it. That's one issue. That I think that's fairly silly. The other issue is, I feel like, imagine this experience, right? Over the last 300 years, the Muslims have been trying to catch up for the West, right? So then you catch up, and then it's like you realize, oh, one of the things that's holding us back is these Asharis, these four madhab people, you know, and so then you get this revolution against it, like, well, guys, why are we holding on to something that we don't have to hold on to? Like the four madhahib are not necessarily right. Why can't I adopt something else? Right? And so that come, but that's kind of it's seriously problematic, right? It's seriously problematic. wallahu alam. And I know somebody like that. I
Okay.
know like one brother I have, he's a sheikh, he's memorized Khalil or most of Khalil, like he's really like mutamadhib. But he's like very pro Qardawi. He's like, yeah, anything, basically anything out there is valid. Which is pretty dangerous, wallahu alam.
Yeah, makes sense.
But at the same time, right? Like somebody if you like as a someone using the madahib, right? Like it is problematic because I'm going through it's basic. Why is it problematic? Is because it's how to explain it? Like there's a lot of things where it's like, well, there's three positions, and then the three positions became one. So now we're adopting one particular position, even though there's other strength there. And then now we're asking everybody to follow this specific position. And then we add to that, oh, you're only allowed to follow one madhab, right? Because you're Hanbali, that's it. You're Hanbali. You're Shafi, you're Shafi. It's like that's really problematic in terms of like, okay, I'm adjusting to the 20th century, 21st century, and now you're telling me I can't even leave my madhab, you know? And it becomes truly sectarian, right? Which is kind of like it's seriously problematic. Um, so so then you say no, don't follow one madhab, follow the four madhahib, and then the next step is follow the 18 madhahib, right? Or follow everything that exists and doesn't exist. It's actually it's a difficult process. It's not easy. It's not easy. Wallahu a'lam. Khair. Um, um, And there's issues, like say, for example, like the open-endedness of things is very dangerous when you have open-ended things. You know, there's this position, that position is kind of just there, and it's like, well, what's the school? It's problematic. Okay, um, we did that. So the next issue says في الكلام في إجماع الأعصار. Okay, so what about next generation, the generation after that? مذهب مالك رحمه الله وغيره من الفقهاء أن إجماع الأعصار حجة. So that doesn't. It's a bit odd then. So how do we marry? How do we say that that the ijma of next generations is a proof, but the ijma of the tabi'in isn't a proof? It doesn't mean that. What he means is if the Sahaba disagreed, is that disagreement now cemented and that's how it is? Right? So, but what about if I just don't know the mas'ala? Here is a mas'ala. This issue was not debated by Sahaba, and it was only debated by the tabi'een, and then the tabi'een agreed that it was halal or haram. That's what we're talking about here. So that's an issue, okay. But the issue is there's a mas'ala khilafiyya between Sahaba, and then أجمع التابعين أو التابعين على خلافه على قول واحد. Does that make sense? So we're talking about two different things. One is the Sahaba debated, and then the next generation or the generation after that agrees on one of the two positions or one of the three positions, whatever it is. As opposed to, what if the Sahaba didn't debate, the mas'ala never came up, and now the third generation, fourth generation, 10th generation agrees that it's halal or haram. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Right? So he says, وأنكر قوم أن يكون إجماع الأعصار حجة إلا للصحابة رضي الله عنهم. Right? والدليل على أن إجماع الأعصار حجة وهو أن الله عز وجل أثنى على هذه الأمة وبين فضلها ونبه عليه وعلى وجوب الحجة بقولها لقوله تعالى في القرآن في مواضع كثيرة مثل قوله كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن منكر الآية. وقوله عز وجل أيضا وكذلك جعلناكم أمة وسطا لتكونوا شهداء على الناس. So you're not shaheed, right? So if the ummah agrees on something and then they command the right and forbid the wrong, but they're not actually right. For example, they ban women going out the house without hijab, but actually hijab is sunnah, it's not obligatory, like whoops. You know what I'm saying? They all command people to pray, but actually there's no such thing as a sharia. So the whole ummah is so the ummah has been praised as being a shaheed, right? When they're not actually witness to anything. Wallahu a'lam. So anyway, so this is the argument for against the previous point. Same thing. The Sahaba agree upon something. They had three opinions, and the Tabi'een agreed that one of them was right, or two of them were right, and one of them was wrong. خلاص. Right? Same argument. And he says, وَمِنَ السُنَّةِ قَوْلُ النَّبِيِّ صلى الله عليه وسلم أُمَّتِي لَا تَجْتَمِعُ عَلَى ضَلَالَةٍ. Right? And he says, here it says, أقرب رواية إلى رواية المؤلف ما رواه أبو نعيم في تاريخ أصفهان. Does that sound very sahih? Just, I'm seeing this. Abu Nu'aym fi Tarikh Asbahan. It's not really going to be a source, is it? He says وفي سنة هذا حديث كلام لكنه روي من حديث أبي مالك الأشعري رواه أبو داود وسكت عنه فهو عنده حجة. Right? والله أعلم. So he says وقال عنه ابن كثير في تحفة الطالب في إسناده النظر. Right? And so who did the takhrij? So in general, any hadith that's in usul, it's often going to be in the Mukhtasar Ibn Hajib, and there is I believe Ibn Hajar did it. Ibn Hajar or somebody else. There is a takhrij of a hadith in Mukhtasar of Ibn Hajib in usul, and it's called something. I can't remember what it's called now. Can somebody find it? Takhrij Ahadith Mukhtasar Ibn Hajib. I'm pretty sure it's Ibn Hajar Asqalani, but it escapes me now. So in general, basically, there's a hadith that's in usul, you're going to go there. That's your first place to look. And he gives a whole takhrij here. So it's not a real hadith. Wallahu a'lam. وقوله عليه الصلاة والسلام لا تجتمع أمتي على خطأ. وقوله أيضا لا تزال طائفة من أمتي ظاهرين على الحق لا يضرهم من خالفهم حتى تقوم الساعة. Well, and then he mentions other things then. Okay, خير. So it says الكلام على العلة والمعلول. So it says قال القاضي الجليل أبو الحسن رضي الله عنه العلة عند مالك والفقهاء هي الصفة التي يتعلق الحكم الشرعي بها. So it is not the actual reason. That's the issue. So is pork haram because there is something that is innate about pigs and pork that make it haram, or does Allah make a pig haram to eat and then label the hurma by saying, I have made this haram because it is a pig? Can you see the difference? So one is, this thing would be haram whether or not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it haram, because it has an illah, right? There is an illah here, you know? So I'm talking to a scientist or an atheist, and I'm like, look how Allah has raised the clouds. He's like, Habibi, the clouds are less dense than the air around it. That's why they go up. Simple as that. Like, you don't need God to raise the clouds, you know? It's just, it has an illah. You know, it's just, there's an illah. Like, there's a thing that's making it happen. Okay, and then I say, look how Allah has blessed me with fire. And he says, there's nothing amazing about fire. Fire is exothermic reaction between two things, and it makes heat. Big deal. God didn't make that happen, right? And I say, no, it's not true like that. So he sees it as an illah. So the issue is how he views science and how he views morality is the same thing, is that there is something that is making this thing bad, right? Whereas we don't say that. He says, الصفة التي يتعلق الحكم الشرعي بها. Not, it doesn't make the hukum, but يتعلق به. It tags it. So then as a faqih, I'm trying to find other things with a similar tag, right? What else has the same mark? What else has the same barcode, right? So, you know, I saw wine and I said, why is wine forbidden? It says, oh, because it affects your mind. Okay, what's the difference between wine and marijuana? Okay, same thing. Okay, great. So marijuana is also haram. There we go. Right? So I found the same tag on it. As opposed to a Mu'tazili who would say logically, doing anything that takes away your mind is that affects your mind in that kind of way would be logically bad. The illah makes it haram independent of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. He says والعلة في مواضعة اللغة تفيد ما يتغير حكم بوجوده. It means a reason, right? So this thing is there or it's not there. ولهذا سمي المرض علة. It's a reason because it makes you sick. لما تغيرت الحال عما كانت عليه بوجوده. ويصفون ما له فعل الفعل أو لم يفعل علة. Why did you do this? What is the علة of this thing? جئتك لعلة كذا, right? ولم آتك لعلة كيت كيت, right? So that's what we mean by this thing here. ومن حق العلة العقلية حق so that's what he's mentioning there. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. He says والعلة الشرعية تفارقها في جميع هذه الوجوه بلا خلاف بين القائسين إلا في اختصاصها ببعض الأعيان فإن من يمتنع من جواز تخصيص العلة الشرعية يسوي بينها وبين العلل العقلية في هذا there's something else. So basically it's that, as I mentioned. I'm not going to read the whole thing there, but that's the upshot. Amal ma'alul, yeah, same thing there. So it's not actually caused, right? Murder is not made haram by the fact that you're taking someone's life without right, but rather Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has labeled it. And he says, whenever any other situation you do the same thing in is also forbid. I also forbid, right? So this is the fundamental, difference of agreement between the Mu'tazila and Ahl Sunnah. Right? So then the question is, do things have illas? Right? So it says, واختلف الناس فيما يدل على صحة العلة وهل تصح بالجريان والطرد في معلولاتها أو تعلم صحتها بغير ذلك. How do we know, like, how do I know how to find out whether I can do analogy to a pig or not? Right? So منهم من يقول علامة صحتها جريانها في معلولاتها وألا يدامجها أصل وألا يدامجها أصل. So the fact that you find it in all of these things. Whenever I saw this was the reason. Whenever I find, so this must be the reason for it. ومنهم من يقول يحتاج أن يثبت أولا أنها علة ثم جريانها بعد ذلك مرتبة أخرى. Similar kind of idea. وقالوا لأن من يعلل بالطرد والجريان لو قيل له لما علقت الحكم بها, right? So you have to find it's kind of a tricky process. Find the reason and then prove that it's found in all of these things, right? So for example, the Shafi'is, we say, why is wine najas? We say because it is ma'i' muskir, right? It is because it's a liquid inebriant. Okay? So we say, so can you see that's kind of circular? So like weed is not like marijuana is not najas, so it's not najas. Okay, why? Because it's not ma'i' and it's not muskir. So that's kind of circular, So you right, so it said lima alaqt al-hukm biha. Why didn't you say muskir? And then you could have included it. So he says فإذا قيل له لما صارت علة, why was it مائع مسكر? Why is it like that? قال لأن الحكم يتعلق بها أينما وجدت وهذا يؤدي إلى التناقض. It goes around in circles, right? Right. So then basically, so he's just going into these things. So we don't have to go into all these discussions here, but this is the problem, right? Of how do you work this out? Is it like this or is it like that? So anyway, does the Quran tell us that there's reasons for things? Yes, there is reasons for things, right? Okay. So the point is, as non-Mu'tazila, we are trying to describe what Allah is doing, not prescribe what Allah should do, right? So we're looking, Allah has made this halal, made this haram, made this halal, made this haram, made this halal, made this haram. Okay, how does it work then? So we kind of do two things. We just look at things, and then we also look at the relationship between what he does plus his maqasid, right? So we are thinking kind of on a higher level, but that's essentially what we're trying to do, right? And we are trying to be as non as superficial as possible, you know. So like, why does she have to wear hijab? Because she has reached puberty and she's a female. Leave it like that, right? As opposed to going into the more depths of why hijab is there, right? We don't really go there. The default is we try and find something that is ظاهر منضبط, something that's measurable, right? Why do you have to pray Maghrib? Because the sun set. Leave it like that, right? Can you find a reason for Maghrib other than the sun setting? No. Okay. So therefore you only pray Maghrib when the sun sets. Done. Right? So he says here, وَاخْتَلَفَ النَّاسُ فِي الْعِلَّةِ الَّتِي لَا تَتَعَدَّى. Same thing here. Why do you pray Maghrib? Because the sun sets. What, you don't believe in analogy? Say, no, I believe in analogy. Okay. So then try and find the cause of praying Maghrib and try and find it in something else. I can't. Okay, so therefore it's al-illa allati la tata'adda. It's not found in anything else. Right? Why is pork haram? Oh, because it's pork. Okay. Is it found in anything else? No. Why do you face the Qibla? Because it's the Qibla. Is that found in anything else? No. Okay. So there's many issues that are like that. And that doesn't mean that we don't believe in analogy. That just means that we couldn't find anything else. There was an illah, but it wasn't found in anything else. And if it was found in something else, yeah, why not? We would follow the rule. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
فعندنا وعند غيرنا من فقهاء أن تكون علة صحيحة. Right? So that's still an illah. Just because you can't find any other example, it's still an illah. وقال أهل العراق, meaning the Hanafis in general, هي باطلة لأنها لا تفيد. What's the point in saying, the reason why Maghrib is obligatory at sunset is because Maghrib is obligatory at sunset. That's not an illah then, is it? Because you didn't find it in anything else. So that's not a concept that you could so it doesn't you didn't find the illah. So then you're going to come along and say, oh, ta'abbudi, right? And I don't know if you're following Sheikh Abdul Ghani. For those of you in Sheikh Abdul Ghani's group, he shared this I think a week ago, 2 weeks ago. He says that there's a quote about ta'abbudi, and it's exactly as the Shafis would say it, right? When we say ta'abbudi, we mean the illah cannot be found in anything else. It doesn't mean there's no illah. Right? It's like we pray Maghrib at Maghrib. Why? Because Maghrib. Okay, what's the illah? That is Maghrib. Okay, well, where else is that found? Nothing else is not found in it. So, but that's we call it ta'abbudi, right? So why is it that when you wake up at night, when you wake up in the morning in the Hanbali school, you have to wash your hands 3 times specifically before you put it in a container? Why? Ta'abbudi, meaning the illah is that you woke up and the illah is that you woke up and when you do that you have to wash your hands 3 times. That's the thing. So they call it ta'abbudi because you can't find it in anything else. Whereas the Shafis, we wouldn't do that. We don't call it ta'abbudi. We would say the illah is that it's makruh to put something in a small body of water unless you know for sure that it's pure. So for the Shafis, if you had a camera on your hand the whole night, then it would no longer be offensive to put that in that thing because the illah is adam al-yaqeen, right? That's the illah, right? And so it's slightly different. Whereas for the Hanbalis, it's ta'abbudi, right? The issue of using earth to clean when you're in with dog filth. The Shafis, we call it ta'abbudi. We don't call it. So the relied upon position anyway is, so we have to use earth. Why? Because it's a dog. and because the Prophet ﷺ told us to do that. So it looks like it's ta'abudi, right? The other position, which is also the Hanbalis, that we can use soap and things like that. That's saying no. The reason for the earth is that it is using earth soil while cleaning it is because that's a detergent. So I could use a soap, I could use washing up liquid, I could use whatever else, right? If that makes sense, right? The Jumhur, removing filth is done with water. Ta'abudi, right? We call it ta'abudi. Like, so what we mean is because it is filth and because filth can only be removed with water, right? So we call that ta'abudi, but it's not really, so what we mean is we can't find another reason, right? Or we identified the reason and that's not found in anything else. Does that make sense?
Yes.
My goal is to be have an honorary what's it called? And you Hanbalis, you have like a hidden like club where you like wear funny cloaks and meet up in the middle of the night and read like Hawashi like old Hawashi in is there some kind of gang that you have? Secret society?
How do we know
Who told
shit?
you about it?
Who told
Who
you
told you
about
about it? Yeah, that I know. Just the CIA is trying to get me to hack it. That's why I'm doing this class. Gotta access the hidden group. Alhamdulillah. HHH, what? Hidden Hanbali, what? Hangout, something. Alhamdulillah. So my mission is to get accepted anyway. That's it. If I keep praising, keep talking about Hanbali as my thing. Keep mentioning Hanbali things, and eventually be accepted. Khair. Okay, so that's the point there, basically. Does it exist? Yes. All right, and that's about it. باب الكلام في تخصيص العلة. Okay. So we always spoke about takhsis, so limiting takhsis al-amma, why not, right? So making it even more specific. That kind of happens. I'm not going to go through all of this right now. So just like we can have umum and khusus, we can have the same thing. The illah seemed very broad. Now there was a reason given, but then actually it's even more. It's a khas than that. It's more specific than that, right? Okay, and then here about illatain. So now we could have a illah, we could have two illahs, and we could have a illah murakkaba, right? As for example, the Shafis, we said it's this plus this, right? It's often the case like that, an illah murakkaba, right? وأكثر وأحدهما أكثر فروعا من الأخرى. Okay, I'm not going to do this. The same issue there. I'm going to skip this as well. قول في أخذ قياس. I'm not going to skip this as well. خير. So it says باب القول في الحدود هل تؤخذ من جهة القياس. So الذي عليه مذهب مالك رحمه الله جواز أن تؤخذ الحدود والكفارات والمقدرات من جهة القياس. i.e. قياس has no limits. Right? There's not this kind of like magical thing. So again, for the Hanafis, they have this thing like there's qiyas and then there's no qiyas. There's a place for you to think and a place for you not to think. We say that's not true. So they say, okay, fine, give me the logical reason to why. What's the illah in praying maghrib at maghrib? Oh, because it's sunset. I say, well, there we go. I said, yeah, but that's qiyas. How is that qiyas? You didn't find anything else. There was nothing else that you had to do at sunset because there was no analogy between praying maghrib and anything else. I said, yeah. But had there been something else, I would have found it. So that's just because it's an illah qasira, an illah that is stuck, doesn't have an other. It لا تتعدى. It couldn't find it in anything else, right? So like for example, like Imam Shafi saying, what is the illah for in gold and silver? The illah in gold and silver is that it's currency. Okay, well, is there any other currency beside gold and silver? No. Okay, what was the point in saying that then? So that's like saying the reason why riba applies to gold and silver is because it's gold and silver. So no, it's not. Because if there were another currency, we would apply it. Yeah, but there isn't another currency. So what's the point in saying that? Well, that means when another currency turns up, it applies, right? So the point is the Hanafis, they say no, that's not that there's certain things that there's no room for qiyas in, and the other scholars say there is. There's nothing that they so here هل يجوز أن تؤخذ الحدود والكفارات والمقدرات من طريق القياس? The answer is yes, right? So an example of that, like the Hanafis, they have this thing about the a small amount of najasa is excused, the dirham, right? So for them that's kind of like fixed. It's like they treat like the fatwa of some of the salaf as if it was kind of like revelation, and it's like fixed like that. So whether it's difficult to avoid or not difficult to avoid, it's just overlooked, right? Whereas for the Shafi'is, we say the illah in filth being excused is that it is difficult to avoid and it is a small amount. So a small amount of filth that is difficult to avoid will be overlooked. But if it is not difficult to avoid, then it's not going to be excused. So the Shafi'is will say, yeah, you had, a small amount of tiny drop of urine on you. Yeah, the prayer doesn't count. Okay, why? Because it's not difficult to avoid, right? So the illah is not, it's not fixed like that, right? As opposed to something like qullatain, right? That's on a nas. That's based on a nas, right? So we don't, that wouldn't change. But anyway, the point is the Hanafis, they say like, this, you know, you can't, there's no changing and there's no doing analogy with hudud and these kind of things. These things are fixed. فعندنا أنه جائز ومنع منه بعض أصحاب أبي حنيفة وبعض أصحاب الشافعي وجوزه بعضهم. Right? وقال القاضي رحمه الله وعندي جائز والأصل فيه قالوا فاعتبروا. The default is there, but practically speaking, it's not very useful. Right? Like there's no, it doesn't really do that much. He mentions an example here. He says, فإن الصحابة رضي الله عنهم اختلفوا في حد شارب الخمر في أيام عمر حين استشارهم حتى قال علي رضي الله عنه وغيره من الصحابة إذا سكر هذا, meaning he goes crazy, he says things, هذيان, like وإذا هذا افترى, when he loses it, when he becomes drunk, he will make lies. He'll say so and so committed zina and so did this. فنرى أن حده حد المفتري 80. We'll treat him as if as a قاذف, like the had of قذف, right? Through قياس here. فقابل عمر رضي الله عنه ذلك منه واتفقوا عليه. Okay. So that's basically it. And he says وهذه مقدمة في الأصول في الفقه ذكرتها في أول مسائل الخلاف ليفهمها أصحابنا ولم أستقصي الحجج عليها لأنه لم يكن مقصودي ذلك. So as we mentioned basically, so now he's going to go on to something else. It's not another book by somebody else. So this is the author, the editor. That's basically the end of the book. I've skipped certain things that I don't think on this level really. And inshallah ta'ala, in January, inshallah, between January and Ramadan, we'll try and do something else at a good time, inshallah ta'ala. It won't be the same time necessarily because, inshallah. So we'll stop here, inshallah ta'ala. May Allah forgive me for my shortcomings and forgive any people from Bosnia for coming Hanbali, Bosnia or anywhere else. Inshallah, may Allah we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to return the ummah back to the true Hanafiyyah till Samha, right? Inshallah. And yeah, so we just wanted to read this book because it's nice. Uh, Against the advice of one of my teachers, said, don't try new curricula on students, right? So ideally, we wouldn't do a book like this. You would do something like waraqat, show Hattab on the waraqat. I'm sure there's some Hanbali commentary on the waraqat. But there's other books, inshallah, we'll do something else. Perhaps we do the waraqat, perhaps something else, inshallah ta'ala, later on.
It's fine, Sheikh. We volunteer for being test subjects.
Alhamdulillah, to being tested, yeah.
Yeah.
Alhamdulillah. I don't think Turks can tolerate other opinions. It's not possible, Talib. It's just not in your genes. It's like, you know? Alhamdulillah. Khair, inshallah. Okay, we'll stop here, inshallah ta'ala. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reward the author and the muhaqqiq and and anybody who's involved, and jazakumullah khairan for everybody for attending and your support, inshallah. So inshallah we'll continue in a month or so, inshallah. Sallallahu alaihi wa sallam Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi.